our conversations are on art. And it's a very privileged place to be, and I want to I want to immensely respect it. But it brings a lot of people to Vancouver.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hello, Neil. I'm good. I'm good.
First off, congratulations. I should know how many times you've been on the Power 50. As far as it's been, as long as I've known about it, you've had a role in it, and again this year. And it's a great achievement. So just a quick congratulations. I guess that's self-serving.
Everybody pretends these things don't mean anything, but it's nice to be a part of the fabric of the city I care about. So thank you. Thank you.
I love the fact that there's debate going back and forth when it comes out. It's always exciting for us to be part of it. One of the few things we get very little debate on is whether or not you should be on it or not. Now, some people don't like the concept of the list, but I never get any pushback saying that Rennie shouldn't be on the list. That's always sort of a given. And I think one of the reasons is that you play a lot of roles in this city. I mean, obviously, real estate and real estate marketing would be one that people would be very familiar with respect to you. But you have a lot of friends in politics on both sides of the aisle, but you just have a lot of actual friends, and that might be one. But here today, I'd love to chat about another one that independently you would probably make the list on, is your passion and your dedication to art in this city. You know, I'm actually looking at you right now, and I'm looking over your shoulder, and I think you've told me you've used this has been your perch for COVID, which has been a pretty big thing, this COVID Zoom thing. Can you tell me about the piece that's right over, it looks like your shoulder to me?
So the work behind me is from 1956 by an artist, Charles White, who is masterful figurative drawing, but he is Kerry James Marshall's mentor. And Kerry James Marshall, to me, is the most important living Black artist out there. And it was something I tried to acquire a drawing by Charles for years, and somebody in particular kept showing up buying them was, I'm told, Oprah Winfrey, and for some reason she wasn't in the room at this auction. But the important part is hands are open, spread wide, and this drawing was made into a poster in 1960 for a march in Los Angeles with Martin Luther King and Charles White. And as we think things have changed, they haven't.
Yeah. Well,
so to me, it really stands out as a message.
Well, and
it'll always hang in the house.
You know, one of the things you mentioned is Charles White mentors Kerry James Marshall, and there was very notably a large-scale show that you put on of Kerry James Marshall. And I don't think I'm blowing smoke to say that was, I think, arguably the most important show maybe of the year in any gallery in Canada. Its timing was perfect. It was just as the world was sort of, when I say the world, not the art world, the world at large was starting to appreciate Kerry James Marshall for what he had done. And that was really a sort of watershed moment because, you know, you could be, and I was in Savannah, Georgia, all around the time of that thing, and somebody asked me about that show. And that's a great feeling for a Vancouverite to have. You bring that great feeling because that was a really important show.
It was a show, those works had never been all seen together from the collection because they were always out on loan. But Kerry James Marshall said to me 25 years ago, Bob, if you go in a museum and you don't see a Black figure in a painting, you think that a Black figure doesn't belong in the painting, and I'm going to change that. Yeah. And as I was switching the collection in the early 90s to dealing with a lot with social injustice, it just rang so clear to me. And I was fortunate enough in the late 90s that an actor, and I'll think of his name, passed away, and his furniture all went to auction, and a Kerry James Marshall painting, The Invisible Man from '86, was in the auction, and I acquired it. And dealers laughed at me that I paid double what it was worth.
Yeah.
And I said, but no, this is the basis for Kerry James Marshall. I didn't know what I was doing,
Yeah.
but I just felt that my eye and my heart is where we would go. A lot of collecting is done today with your ear.
Yeah.
And we've just always tried to stay passionate.
The actor, I can't remember his name. His name's Paul. And it was in the movie Sounder. It's faster.
Yeah.
I do remember it because I remember touring the show and saying, and Kerry James Marshall was at the show, which again, you know, a lot of people don't appreciate how important that is for a figure of that stature to be here and to be interacting with people walking throughout the collection. It is just, it's really, I think, to say without precedence in this city at least.
Yeah, at the MCA in Chicago, I walked through, even though I sit on the board of the Art Institute of Chicago, the MCA held the Kerry James Marshall retrospective,
Yes.
which we loaned a number of works to. But I walked through that show with Kerry James and his wife, Cheryl, who's a notable artist, but stage actress in her own right. And it took us 3 hours to walk through because, as I said to Cheryl, it was like walking through with Beyonce.
Yeah.
And he is so generous with his knowledge. If you ever get a chance to watch Kerry James Marshall speak or watch online, you will see that real baseline philosophy of dealing with what we're going through today.
Well, which leads me to what I think is still on the wall. You know, so this spring comes around, and as you say, George Floyd, there's a whole new focus on the Black Lives Matter and the social justice movement. And at that time, there's a show going on at the Rennie Museum with two artists, Barclay Hendricks and Lorna Simpson, that one would think you might have a time machine if you could figure out doing that show at this particular time in a place, you frankly, removed as Vancouver is from the comings and goings of the art world. Tell me how that came about, because those are two, we talked about Kerry James Marshall, we talked about Lorna Simpson and Barclay Hendricks, likewise, two absolute giants of the fine art world.
Yeah, so even though right now we're focusing on Black art, African-American art, we deal with diversity, Palestinian artists, Colombian artists, Mona Hatoum, etc. And I did a statement in an interview the other day, and I said, I do not collect female artists, but we have 97 female artists in the collection. We collect art. And just on diversity, you know, Barclay, we brought him into the collection, and Barclay did a painting in 1977 of himself naked, full, like John Singer Sargent, full portraiture. And whenever a museum wanted to show Barclay's work, they were very hesitant to show a naked Black man. Any museum will show a naked white woman, but a naked Black man was too controversial, especially 77. And for years, whenever I saw Barclay, I would say, you have to sell me the painting. And he'd go, I want it to go to a museum, Bob. And I'd go, but I'm a fake museum, Barclay. And I went over to see him at a dinner that I was at. And I said, Barclay, I said, you want it to go to a museum, you want it to be seen. I said, I'm a fake museum, but I will hang it in my dining room. And he said, if you hang it in your dining room, I will sell it to you. So that became an anchor point for what we call collecting artists in depth. We like to span a career. We have Barclay's Black Flag from '67 when he was in school, right through to the last show he did, Photo Bloke, the pink painting. But brilliantly endowed, you know, it's traveled ever since we've had it. We brought it home. But I said to Barclay, and he passed in 2017, and just before he passed, I said, Barclay, would you mind having a show with Lorna? And he was offended that I asked. And I said, but I don't know socially where you guys fit in. He goes, I just adore her and she adores him. And Lorna, when she had her Venice presentation in 2015, I was acquiring two of the paintings, and I phoned her and her dealer, and I said, why don't we keep the five together so throughout history, your Venice room stays together. And that conversation of Lorna dealing with the objectification of women, paying attention to the hair, the interchangeable between the animal and the woman, the gold sculpture that you saw there that she did for the show, was a wonderful conversation between two artists that adore each other, that are both attacking identity, racial identity, gender identity in their own way, but it was a wonderful conversation. And Barclay's wife was up here. We brought her up for the show to make sure that she saw that these works were in a safe place. And we look at that we're a custodian for these artists, and our job is, I am a privileged white male. I am not in the conversation. How do I elevate artists' voices? Sure. And we all have to understand our role in this art journey, and that is mine, is to elevate their voices and get these works out traveling as much as possible from little old Vancouver.
Well, I mean, one of the things is that's great about the museum is, and why I proselytize about it, is because it's the opportunity to not have to travel, but to see something at a point in time. You know, one of the tragedies about Barclay Hendricks is that it's a story that people like to hear, but it doesn't actually happen anymore. He wasn't created. He was late in life. He had quit painting several times during his career, as far as I understand. And when people see the paintings you have hanging at the show, they're unbelievable. And I don't mean, you know, they're multi-layered and there's a bunch of things going on, but they're also so unbelievably inviting and compelling that you think, well, how could this artist not have been huge his entire career long? And that just simply wasn't the case with him.
Because he was Black.
Because he was Black. The only reason.
An imaginary show that I've actually been talking to a museum about taking on loan is with Kerry James Marshall's Invisible Man. And then you take Barclay Hendricks, brilliantly endowed, and an artist that is known but not as well, Lyle Ashton Harris. When he was 18 years old, he photographed himself full scale, 4 photographs at 18 of himself naked. In 1979, he was shunned by Black artists because here Black artists are trying to be accepted. Along comes a kid naked in a ballerina outfit, and they pushed him out on sexuality, on nakedness, on color, and he couldn't be accepted. So we have those 4, and also Piss Christ by Andre Serrano. But because we're so interested in art culture and cultural history, we have the one that hung in a church in Italy in the 90s that somebody smashed right in the middle of the crucifix. Okay. And Andre had held that for years. And we try, artists understand who their works will be talking to. So we would like to show those 4 works together. I have a feeling it'll go to an American institution first and then come back here.
And before we leave this actual show, I do want to say that you can go on the website, the Rennie Museum website, and you can virtually go through the Hendricks Simpson show right now. You can, I mean, one of the benefits maybe for the real estate background is it reminds me of one of those 3D house tours, but you can go and see all the works in situ. It's not quite the same as being there, but it's a great facsimile. I hadn't done it until earlier this week, and I was blown away by your ability to at least be transported to what's happening in the museum. It's quite something.
I think we should hire you, Neil. But we're open free to the public 3 days a week. You know, we all have to get through COVID. And we have no answer. You know, back in March, we thought it might have been September. But as we get towards the third quarter of 22, third quarter of 21, first quarter of 22, I think we'll be able to see daylight, and we're keeping the show up longer. Although we've decided that our next show after this, I think we all need a break, and we're just going to do a beautiful painting show and maybe calm down about the messaging, and just for 6 months just put up great paintings that have never been seen in the city.
Yeah, well, that's amazing as well. So I just want to talk before we leave. I was going to be 15 minutes. I knew I would talk too long about this, but I want to talk about generally your perception of what's going on in the city. You know, outside of the Rennie Museum, we have what's happened. We have a new VAG director. We have, you know, Rodney Graham had the piece. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about public art. Rodney Graham had the chandelier piece that was installed over by the West Bank building, just off the Granville Bridge. It didn't seem like it. Vancouver didn't seem particularly appreciative, or I'm not sure if the messaging on it was right. But I'm curious about your thoughts about. Let's talk about public art in Vancouver as it sits in the last few years.
I think if you're going to hang, you know, the artist was paid $400,000. West Bank spent $4 million total. So the installation. I think the problem there is the curator and the the stakeholders that put it up didn't stand up and talk about that. That spinning chandelier comes from a film Rodney did in 2005 that's about Newton's spinning bucket of water.
Yeah.
They just let it get away with all this wealth under a bridge, and that is an interpretation, but it wasn't the artist's interpretation when he did it. And everybody ran for cover and hid behind the $4 million. And I consoled Rodney. I really felt bad for him that he wasn't given the opportunity to talk about the original work from 2005. It all turned into sensation. It has calmed down, but public art is supposed to create conversation. But I find in this age of sound bites that we don't finish the sentences and the conversations, and we have to get back to that. I'm not defending whether it's right or whether that piece is wrong, but I do think that the curator of the piece should have defended it from its artistic merits, but everybody runs for cover once it gets to the class divide that it became to represent.
You always
but go ahead.
I'm just going to say, you always would hear whispers that our famous Vancouverite living, when I say international artists, I mean people who show it in London and New York and so forth, that in Vancouver they could never find the love. And this sort of reinforced that. Rodney Graham lives here, is internationally, unbelievably recognized artist. It's an absolute treasure that he's here. And it was a pretty rough ride for sure. It
was a really rough ride. So we're not in that movie. We just try and keep our head down and do what we do. We opened the museum in 2009. We do feel it's starting to find its place in the city, and it's a very privileged place to be. And I want to immensely respect it. But it brings a lot of people to Vancouver. But the Vancouver Art Gallery, I've always been more about the content than the box. Yeah. And I've spoken to the new director and just says, you'll never hear a negative word out of me. We'll stay out of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned real estate. We could talk about art for an hour and a half, but real estate, I want to close. One of the fun things about if people haven't been to the museum is the integration of the real estate company in the museum. You see people, you can see through glass, and if you crane your neck and so forth, you can see the activity going on, and it's a great, vibrant environment. So tell me how that's been throughout COVID. How's the office been? How's we know the market's gone crazy in some ways. How's that been though, from your perspective?
You mentioned it graciously in your write-up that we will pretend we don't read, but we do. We sent 92 people home on March 13th to work from home. We're now at about 30% in the office, dividing into two teams. That if one team gets COVID, we can bring in the other team. But it's an energy center, having people come to look at art. We do 20, 25 people at a time through tours, not through COVID. We're really limiting public engagement at the space. But the goal was, when we did it, it's the oldest building in Chinatown, that let's be part of the solution. And when we worked on Woodwards, I always believed that Simon Fraser University, that education or arts and culture is probably the most understanding demographic that can bridge the fortunate and the less fortunate. It's not as intrusive. It keeps the conversation going. And that's why we picked Chinatown rather than building a white cube on South Granville. I don't think that would have been respectful to the art collection.
Yeah.
Either.
I've run out of time. I ran out of time 5 minutes ago, but I wasn't going to stop.
It's okay. We'll finish at lunch.
If people have been to the museum, they know what I'm talking about / gushing about, how important it is. What an amazing privilege it is to have it here. If people haven't, they really should go see it. It really opens up a new dimension to the arts community and just the cultural community and cultural dialogue in the city. We're very lucky to have it. And I appreciate you chatting about it with us. And congratulations again on the Power 50. It's well-deserved, Bob.
No, I with immense respect to Vancouver Magazine, we always need the fabric of the city to be kept alive and in conversation. And thanks for you guys doing what you do.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, bye-bye.